Hi, my name is James Cash, and today I want to talk a little bit more about Emacs stuff. In my previous video, when I was doing kind of a quick run through of my overall Emacs configuration, one of the things I mentioned was my Helm configuration, how I have a bunch of stuff customizing Helm a little bit. So today I thought I'd talk a little more about how and why I do that. So Emacs has a number of completion systems. There's a built-in completing read. There's things like I do, IV/council, and then Helm kind of has its reputation of being the kind of most heavyweight one. I really like Helm. It's one of the things I contribute to the Patreon because it contributes so much to just my day-to-day workflow. I really love it. One of the things I really like about Helm is that it's really easy to add extra actions to your sources. So not only is it very easy to have this nice autocomplete searching through all sorts of stuff, through files, through functions, through help, through whatever, name it. It's easy then to give yourself different actions you can do instead of just simply selecting the file or buffer or whatever it is. You can add additional things you can do with it. So one of the first things I thought I'd kind of start talking about is adding actions to sources. Helm is great, but I find the documentation may be a little bit hard to follow, especially if you start doing more advanced stuff. It's one of these things where really the source is the best documentation, and I think for some things, like all of the options for sources, kind of the only documentation is reading through the source. So I thought I'd run through some little examples of stuff that I really like doing with Helm. So hopefully some people out there will maybe have a little more to go on instead of just reading source. I've written a couple blog entries in the past, I think, about doing some of this Helm stuff. So I'll link those as well if people want to read. This will probably cover kind of some more general stuff. So the first thing I want to look at is adding custom actions to a Helm source. This is a thing that, in some senses, in some cases can be pretty straightforward, and others can be a little more complicated. Example that I wanted to do, I mentioned previously, I was using Vim most recently before I switched back to Emacs. One of the things I really liked was the kind of the equivalent of Helm I was using for jumping between files. I had bindings to open the selected thing in a split. So I had to press Control V on the file or whatever to open it in a vertical split, Control S to open it in a horizontal split. So if I'm here, I want to open my init EL in a vertical split, I hit Control V, opens like this, and then I want to go to user, I want to open that horizontally, I hit Control S, opens like that. So just a little thing, there is a built-in thing, open in other window, which I probably could have made work, but I had the muscle memory of the Control V, Control S, and I really like to specifically say, do I want it to be horizontal or vertical, because I really like to control how I use splits, because often when I'm working on Emacs, I work on a pretty big monitor, just one, like a single giant monitor, and I'll have like many splits, usually like probably at least 3, sometimes as many as 9, maybe 6 would be sort of a standard. So I really divvy up the window, so I like to have control over how I do that. And so there's lots of different ways I can be searching for stuff in Helm. I want to make those bindings available everywhere. So the first step is making the function that's going to do what I want. I do that in a little bit of a complicated way for not necessarily good reasons, kind of this is just what I wanted to do. Initially this was much more complicated. I've kind of winnowed it down, made it simpler over time, because I use a little local macro, using macrolet, to define these functions. The reason I'm doing it like this is because I wanted to define a bunch of really similar functions, because I wanted to make a function for both buffers and files, open the thing either in a horizontal and a vertical split. So at this point, it's only 2 combinations of 4 different functions. It's not that many, but it seemed tedious to have to write those a lot. And again, initially, this was actually doing more before I found better ways to do this. I had multiple different functions involved here, and actually you can kind of see, actually, I think it's still somewhat doing that. It's making some extra functions. So in any case, let's have a look. So what this macro is doing is kind of these 2 macros. One is for defining a function, so we give it a name, an open function, and a split function. So the open function is controlling whether it's opening a buffer or a file, and then the split is controlling whether it's horizontal or vertical. So this simply defines a function, takes a candidate argument as Helm actions do. So a function that you can use as a Helm action is going to take the candidate as an argument. But in this case, it actually ignores it, because what it does is use the Helm marked candidates function, which gives you all the things you selected, because in Helm you can actually select multiple things. So if I go back to this list, if I can have like user, and I do control space and init, and I hit control space to select both of those things. Now if I hit control V, it opens all of those selected files in vertical splits. So that's why it's doing it like this. For simple actions, just taking the candidate argument would be fine. Then it selects the window that does a split on it, given the function, uses the open function to open it, and then I call balance windows after, because it will end up with things weirdly shaped. I also want windows to be balanced. Then it wraps this in another layer of functions where it defines the function to just do that thing, to, as we just saw, each candidate, open it in the split, and then it adds another function, which I had the suffix command. So we see here, I define the function. So for a given open function now, make one to split window right and split window below, are the ways I like to do it. If you also want to be able to put the window to the left or put the window to the above, you could add more of these here. I don't find the need for it. And then we define this function, which again is like the name and then the operation type, which is like buffer or file, which we'll see when we call it down below. And then switch vertical, and then we have the command, and that wraps this in with Helm alive p, Helm exit and execute action, which is kind of this stuff that I have to wrap in. This is to make it work as an interactive command versus just the action. We'll kind of look more at what this means shortly. Define this, and then down here I'm finally calling these macros. So this one uses switch to buffer and will be buffer type. This one uses find file as file type. So now we've defined kind of these couple sets of functions where there's both just the action function, so a function that is not interactive, that gets the candidates, opens it, and then a command which wraps it, uses this Helm alive p. This is the one that we're going to be defining key bindings for. So how do we use this? So I'm actually going to first look at how I do it for Helm projectile, because that is kind of the simplest one. So the way that works is I just call Helm add action to source, which is a function from Helm. We give it a doc string, and we can do this like formatting to show the key binding that we're going to install on it. We say this is the function. So note, this is not the function with that suffix dash command. This is just that action function that just takes the candidates, does the splitting, and then I tell it add this to the projectile file sources list. So this is the Helm source that's defined in Helm projectile for finding files, and I do the same thing for the horizontal splits. And then I also now add some definitions into the Helm projectile find file map for Control V and Control S, because those are the bindings I like to use. And this is where I use those command versions of the functions. So this is why I have kind of those two levels of wrappers, where the unwrap, that inner function that just does the splitting, that's the one that we add as an action to the source. And then we have that command, the one with the interactive, the Helm alive p doing all that wrapping stuff. That's the one we put on the key binding, which for whatever reason I found that's how that needs to work. So Helm projectile is kind of the best case scenario, where once that the Helm projectile library is loaded, it defines this source, the source projectile files list, so I can just add it. Some do things a little bit differently. So for example, for switching between buffers and just the Helm find file and Helm buffer, that works slightly differently. If I recall, it actually creates the source dynamically, so just using that add to source doesn't work. Instead, we use add to list, and there are these special variables, the Helm type buffer actions, which I add the action of the same doc string and then the function for switching to buffers in horizontal and vertical splits, and similarly for that Helm type file actions and Helm find file actions. I think to figure out that these are the variables you need to add to, I'm just looking through the source of Helm itself, seeing how does find files work. It does this in this slightly more convoluted way, adding it to this extra variable, because again, as I recall, the sources for these actually get created dynamically. There's not like this one like def consted source or whatever. It's defining it on the fly. And I believe this is so it can like add extra actions depending on the context and stuff. So sometimes you need to do this, and then and similarly I have key bindings for these other ones. Same idea in this key map, to Control V for the command one. And then finally, let's look at Helm RG. Let's ignore this patch because I'm doing some other wacky stuff. So this one I'm doing slightly differently, where I'm defining these standalone functions here that what they do is bind this dynamic variable, the Helm RG display buffer normal method, to be this function that just takes the name and does the split and switch to buffer. This is because the Helm RG source does things slightly differently, so we need to kind of have these slightly different functions to control how it actually opens, because the Helm RG, the action that is passed to, it's already going to open it. So essentially what you can control is how it opens it. It's not quite the same like arbitrary flexibility as the Helm projectile, Helm files, Helm buffers, where you can kind of do whatever. The Helm RG is going to display methods, and what we can do by giving different actions is make it open it differently. And we do that here by binding a dynamic variable to be the function that it's going to call. So we have this similar split here between kind of the base function and then wrapping it in a command. I didn't bother doing it with that fancy macro wrapper thing this time because it's pretty simple. So for both horizontal and vertical, I first define these helper methods that, given the buffer name, make a split, switch to the buffer in that split, and then wrap this in a function which binds this dynamic variable to that function and then calls that Helm RG, this internal async function on the output, the matches, and just binding that. So this is maybe a little convoluted. Helm RG, this is a while ago. There may be a better way of extending this for now. If I had more time, I should probably submit a patch to Helm RG to make this a little bit easier. But kind of the beauty of Emacs and eLisp is that I can still extend it. Even if there's not this same nice simple interface, we can still add the capability to do stuff that we want. So similar, we have these functions. We can just add it to the source. Again, there's this Helm RG process source. Add these functions defined there. And then I also have this same sort of template for the command version of the function, which just wraps it interactive with Helm alive p, calls Helm exit and execute action, and then give it the function, and then add this to the Helm RG map. So works the same way, just have to set these things up a little differently. So adding actions is a super useful thing that you can do with Helm. For me, that's one of the biggest game changers to Helm compared to these other things. It's both, the searching, the fuzzy search is great, that's super useful, but making it really easy to just do arbitrary stuff. Like very often I'll use, say, Helm buffers to find a bunch of buffers and then just kill all buffers of a particular mode, something like that. You can use things like Helm files to jump right to the magit status for a file in a given directory. Instead of going to a file, go to a dured in that file. All sorts of super useful stuff that you can extend. So actions, that's super useful. As I say, they'll kind of, a lot of times it'll involve some source diving to figure out how best to extend a given source. The next thing I want to show is how to make your own source. There's a ton of depth to this. You can get really deep in this, add all sorts of fancy stuff with it. I've only used this for fairly simple things in the past. I have a package called Helm Switch Shell, which is something that I just made for my own use to switch between originally E shell, now I use it for vterm, supports a bunch of different types of shells, switch between them, and basically the reason I'm using this instead of just Helm switch buffers is because I want to have a custom sort, whatever. You can look into that package if you're interested, maybe we'll talk about it later. But what I wanted to do was just give a quick demo of how you can make your own Helm source, because there's a couple little tricks that are not super obvious that I had to, again, look at the source to see how best to do them. So I'm just going to start by, let's make a new file here called helmdemo.el. I'm not going to use that test one because I did prepare a little bit, I'm sorry. I'm just going to start, what's my snippet here? I'm going to start, first of all, Lex, I thought that was it. I was saying lexical binding T. I'm actually using Emacs 28, so I don't know if I still need to do this. I think it's the default, but whatever. I figure it's a good habit to keep. So I'm going to kind of just quickly make a Helm source. My idea here, kind of a trivial example, because I want to focus on building the source rather than how we're doing all the stuff. We're going to make a special Helm source for just switching between like special buffers. So essentially all the buffers whose names begin and end with stars. And then maybe we'll extend it after to make new ones. That's kind of one of the interesting things. So we're going to start by making, call it Helm switch special buffers. This will be kind of the main entry point. It's going to be an interactive function. And what we're going to do here is call Helm, the function to start our completion. We're going to give it a source. We'll take source is, we're just going to give it 1. And this is where we're going to define a source and put it in here. So here I'm just going to kind of, we'll say switch special buffers source. This will library be internal, so I'm going to do a double thing. Give the name of the buffer. We'll say Helm specials. And we can give it a prompt. We'll say special buffer this. So we have our function. Clearly right now though, we need to give it a source. I'll note there's a bunch of other options for you can pass to Helm, all sorts of different things, pre-selecting the buffer, the key map, all these fancy things. For now, I'll just kind of start with the simple stuff. As you get more into this, do more advanced Helm stuff, and start playing with the extra options, we'll keep it simple for now. So the next thing we're going to do is define our source. So that'll be our Helm switch special buffers source. And to make our source, we're going to use Helm build. I'm just going to do a sync source because we don't need anything fancier, and that'll just be nice, simplest thing here. Special buffers source, I guess. And now, again, this takes a bunch of arguments. So first, we're going to give it a key map, which for now is going to be won't have anything. This would be where we would add other bindings. So it's called Helm switch special map, and we'll define this up here as well. So our Helm, what did I call it? Helm switch special map. So that's going to be, we're going to start with a new make sparse key map, and then we're going to set the key map parent of our map to be Helm map, so it'll inherit the default bindings. Return the map, and let's say this would be where we'd like add more key bindings. At the very least, just by having this map defined, then if we made this into a real library, people could add bindings to it to extend it to do stuff. We have our candidates, and here we're going to give it a function that's going to generate the list of candidates. So here we'll call Helm switch special get candidates. Again, this is a function that we're going to need to define. Oops. So we'll just kind of, again, stub this out for now. Special get candidates. And so that's going to take no arguments. We'll fill this in later. Then we're going to give it a list of actions. So here we're going to use Helm make actions to build this. And so this is going to take a series of strings, which is the name of the action, and then a function that will be what that action does. So this is going to be for switching buffers. So the thing it's going to receive is going to be a buffer. So I'll say the basic ones we could have like select, where take a function, do a function that will take the candidate, and then we'll say for now to switch to buffer candidate. You may think here I could have just used switch to buffer as a function. I'm doing like this because we're going to want to change some other stuff later. Similarly, we'll do delete, which is going to take the candidate and then just call kill buffer on candidate. So we have our actions. Now let's define our get candidates. So we can do this fairly straightforwardly. So I'm just going to use loop from the cllib. Just want it to be fancy, or want it to be proper. Should probably require all the things that we're going to use in this. So cllib for loop, require helm lib, and I know I'm also going to want to require rx in a moment. So we could do for buff and buffer list, but loop actually has a built-in thing. So we can say for buff being the buffers. So if you haven't used loop before, it's a very common Lispy thing. It is very fancy, kind of this whole other mini language for looping, but we're nothing super fancy here. So if we're going to loop over all the buffers, and we're going to say when string match p. So when the regex we give as the first argument matches a string, and it's a little annoying to write regular expressions in strings in Emacs. You have to double state backslashes, so I'm going to use the very nice Rx library where I can build my regular expression as S expressions. There's going to be beginning a string, and then a star, and it's nice because it's a literal star now, and then any number of anythings, and then another star, and then end of string. And when that matches the buffer name of buff, so when that is the case, we're going to collect, and here's where we're going to build up our candidate list. And so, and there's a couple ways of doing this. The simple way that we're going to use here is our candidate list is going to be a list of pairs, where the first element is the display string, the thing that's going to show, and then the second argument is the actual candidate, and this is going to be what the argument to the function is. So this is pretty convenient because it lets us show, say, let's say buffer name is going to be the first argument, so it'll display the name of the buffer, and then that second thing can just be the buffer itself, so our actions don't have to try to go from name to buffer, they just get the buffer object itself. And then we say we're going to collect this into candidates, and then we'll say finally return candidates. So keeping it nice and simple for now. So we can just try now eval buffer, and it's complaining. All right, I think it's complaining because I said actions. I believe it's supposed to be just action. Let's try that again. Okay, that seemed to work. So now if I call helm switch special buffers, ignore the fact that I have a previous one, and hey, we have our list of all the buffers that have stars in them. I can start typing and then jump to the one I want. If I do that again, special buffers, we have our list of things here, and then I could also say hit tab on one, and then I have these actions, so I could also kill the buffer, and so now that killed that lfeed log buffer. Hopefully that didn't do anything too bad. So we have our basic source working. So as you can see here, it's pretty simple. We just give it a list of things. So before we wrap up, let's do kind of one more, maybe not advanced, but a nice little extra twist that was one of the first things when I was trying to put my first Helm source together that I found a little complicated, that I had to just kind of source that to figure out how to do it. And that's, say we want also the ability to create a new buffer. So the way we're going to do that is add an extra like fake candidate to the top of our candidates list. So here we're going to say so cons onto that list. We'll add another pair that's going to say concat, and then it'll be, I like doing this little plus thing because that's what the Helm switch buffer and Helm switch files shows if you want to make a new file. So to kind of show what I mean, if I just do buffers and I start typing like foo, you see I have this option at the bottom for create buffer. So we want the ability to, with our special source, also create a buffer. Helm switch buffer is a little fancier with sections. We're just going to keep it simple. It's going to be this kind of special candidate at the top. And actually getting a little bit fancier, I would use like propertize to have this thing have a special face to make it look different. Could maybe do that if we say like propertize, and then we have this extra string, we say like display, and then we could give it like a custom face or something like that. But we'll keep this simple for now. Again, this is a more advanced thing. We can, if you're interested, I might do another video on kind of a more in-depth Helm source, but for now, let's keep it simple. So I'm going to show this, and then what we want to show here is the string that the user's typed in so far, and that's available in the special variable Helm input, and then end of star, and then we're going to have, so that's the thing that will be displayed, and then we'll have the actual candidates, remember that's the second thing, just be that string, that Helm input string. So if we define this, and now we try to run our function again, so we see at the top we have that special thing with that plus and then the star star. We start typing, but we start typing and that thing just vanishes. It doesn't match anything. Why is that? So that's because by default the Helm source tries to cache the candidates list because it might be expensive to fetch them again each time. So to make it say, hey, actually rerun the candidates function each time, so our new thing is rebuilt every time, we can add a volatile key to our source. So now we'll eval that again, try running a function. So now as we type foo, we see we have this special foo star source. But if we try to switch to it, it's going to complain that it's not a buffer. So it created it, but it created with the wrong name. It's called FF because we just used switch to buffer, and the candidate wasn't the actual buffer, it's just a string. And it didn't have the name, presumably we'd want to like set a mode on it. So what we'll do here is just check if candidate is a buffer, then we'll just switch to it. Otherwise, we'll make a new one, so we'll switch to buffer, but we're going to do get buffer create, and here we'll name it with the earmuffs. And then this would presumably also be the point where we'd say like set the major mode of the new buffer. So maybe the default would be like a scratch buffer with like the interactive Lisp mode. Maybe then we can have extra actions for making a new special buffer in different modes, but whatever, one thing at a time. So we'll redefine this. Now if we try running this again, we start typing our new thing. Now it makes a new buffer called like star foo star. So that works nicely. But here again, kind of the annoying thing. One thing that's pretty annoying is now if we just start running like skr and I want to get scratch, that first candidate is still our completion thing, our like new thing. So I always have to hit down if I'm switching to an existing buffer. So that's pretty annoying. I could put the new thing at the end of the list instead of the beginning, but then if it's a long list of things I want to create something, it becomes annoying to scroll all the way down. So what I like to do, I think I got this from Helm Find Files, I think, is use a special little trick here where we're going to set up a hook that we're just automatically going to skip the first fate candidate. So to do that, I'm going to make a little helper function, which we'll call Helm switch special move to first real candidate, which I believe is also the name, or the move to first real candidate is what that, yeah, I'm pretty sure it's Helm Find Files does. And what we're going to do here is just check unless the first candidate is a file. So we're going to Helm if buffer p Helm get selection, and then Helm get selection takes some optional things, so like buffer nil, force nil, and then the source is going to be Helm get current source. So unless that's a buffer, meaning unless the thing that's already selected is a buffer, which could happen if we're resuming or whatever, then Helm next line. So this is this function that if we run it, we'll just skip the candidate that is at the top if it doesn't have an actual buffer associated with it. So it'll skip past that first like fake candidate. So we have this. Now how are we going to run it? So Helm actually has a bunch of helpful hooks. So what we're going to do is in our function that we call, our kind of a top level Helm switch special buffers function here, we're going to add a hook to the Helm after update hook. We're going to say run our Helm switch special, Helm, stop, extra S here, Helm switch special, move to first. You can see I've actually, I also have a name of that function for Helm switch shell, the other library that I wrote, which someone unsurprisingly maybe has the same name. So we add this hook here. We want to get rid of that though when we're done. We don't want that to stay around forever after every time Helm updates, because now other Helm sources would also try to be calling our function. So what we can do is add a cleanup argument to our source. Where we say as a cleanup, we're going to call remove hook. Let's do cleanup after ourselves. Helm after update hook, remove that Helm switch special, move to first real candidate. So we define this, we run our thing, and now we see the cursor starts on that, the first actual thing. It skips over that new thing as we type. So it's still matching a real thing, and now when only our real thing, the new thing is at the top, is at the default selected. So now I can just type, SCR for scratch, hit enter, switch right to it. And then if I wanted to make a new thing with like a suffix, I just have to hit up to create it. So that's my quick run through on some maybe intermediate stuff for Helm, customizing existing sources by adding actions and defining our own sources. Just in time as there's a giant plane now flying overhead. But thank you for watching. I hope you found this interesting. As I mentioned, I will link below the post I wrote on doing this sort of Helm custom actions and custom sources stuff. If you found this interesting, please let me know. I hope to make some more videos soon. I think someone mentioned they're interested in, again, something I mentioned in the previous video, my reading setup for Helm and with PDFs, or with Emacs PDF tools. So I may do that next time. Thanks, have a nice day.